None of your business. Claim your space from Intruders, written by Tomium, published by White Ink. Introduction. At some point in our lives, we've all dealt with people who don't seem to understand boundaries. It could be that nosy neighbor who's always peeking over the fence, asking too many questions about your personal life. Or maybe it's a co-worker who constantly pushes for details you'd rather keep to yourself. Sometimes it's even someone close to you, a friend or family member who just doesn't know when to step back. These intrusions can be frustrating, awkward, and even stressful. But what's worse is feeling like you have to let it slide because you don't want to upset anyone or come off as rude. The truth is, though, everyone has the right to their own space and privacy. And it's okay, necessary even, to set boundaries when others start to invade that space. This book is here to help you navigate those tricky situations where people overstep their bounds. We'll talk about different ways to recognize when someone is crossing the line and how to respond in a way that's firm but still respectful. The goal isn't to push people away or create conflict. It's about finding that sweet spot where you can protect your peace without feeling guilty. Each of the 10 chapters in this book will explore common scenarios where people tend to get too close for comfort. You'll learn practical tips and strategies for dealing with these situations so you can feel more in control of your life. Whether it's handling invasive questions, dealing with unsolicited advice, or managing more subtle intrusions, this book has you covered. By the end of our journey together, you'll have the tools and confidence to set clear boundaries and maintain them. You'll be able to stand your ground without feeling like you're pushing people away. Most importantly, you'll have the peace of mind that comes from knowing your life is truly yours, and it's none of their business. Chapter 1. Recognizing the Intruders. Intruders aren't just burglars or people who physically break into your home. In our daily lives, intruders can take many forms. They can be anyone who crosses the boundaries you've set for yourself, whether they mean to or not. They could be friends, family members, co-workers, or even strangers who, for some reason, feel entitled to know more about your life than you're comfortable sharing. The first step to dealing with intruders is recognizing them. This might seem obvious, but sometimes it's not as clear-cut as someone blatantly asking you an inappropriate question. Intrusions can be subtle, masked as casual conversation or friendly advice. They can happen so gradually that you don't even notice until you're deep in a situation where you feel uncomfortable or pressured to share more than you wanted to. So how do you recognize these intrusions? It starts with paying attention to your feelings and reactions in different situations. Have you ever found yourself talking to someone and suddenly feeling uneasy? Maybe your heart starts beating faster, or you feel a tightness in your chest. That's your body's way of telling you something's not right. It's like an internal alarm system that goes off when someone is stepping into your personal space, even if they're not doing it physically. Another clue is how you feel after an interaction. Do you leave the conversation feeling drained, annoyed, or even angry? Do you find yourself replaying the conversation in your head, thinking about all the things you wish you'd said or hadn't said? If so, there's a good chance that the person you were talking to crossed a boundary, and you might not have even realized it at the time. One of the most common forms of intrusion is when people ask questions that are too personal. These questions might come from someone who's just trying to make conversation, or they might be from someone who's deliberately trying to pry into your life. Either way, if the question makes you uncomfortable, It's important to recognize that as a red flag. Not every question deserves an answer, and you're not obligated to share details about your life just because someone asks. It's also important to recognize when someone is giving you unsolicited advice. This is another common way people intrude into our lives. They might think they're being helpful, but often unsolicited advice can feel like criticism or judgment. For example, if you're going through a tough time and someone starts telling you what you should do without you asking for their opinion, that's a form of intrusion. They're stepping into your personal space and making assumptions about what's best for you without considering your feelings or perspective. Another form of intrusion is when people make assumptions about your life and act on them. For example, they might assume they know what's best for you and try to make decisions on your behalf. This can happen in both personal and professional settings. Maybe a family member decides to speak for you in a situation where you should have the final say. Or a coworker might take over a project you were working on because they think they can do it better. These actions, even if they're well-intentioned, can be incredibly intrusive and disrespectful. Once you start recognizing these intrusions, you can begin to address them. But before you can set boundaries with others, it's important to be clear about your own boundaries. What are the things that make you uncomfortable? What are the areas of your life that you want to keep private? Take some time to reflect on these questions and write down your thoughts. The clearer you are about your own boundaries, the easier it will be to communicate them to others. It's also important to remember that your boundaries are personal to you, and they don't have to make sense to anyone else. You don't need to justify your boundaries or explain them in detail. If something makes you uncomfortable, that's reason enough to set a boundary. Your feelings are valid, and you have the right to protect your personal space. In the next chapters, we'll explore how to set these boundaries effectively and how to communicate them to others without feeling guilty or creating unnecessary conflict. But for now, focus on recognizing the intruders in your life. Pay attention to how different interactions make you feel, and start identifying the areas where you need to set clearer boundaries. This might not happen overnight. It's a process of becoming more aware of your own needs and feelings, and that takes time. But the more you practice recognizing these intrusions, the easier it will become to protect your personal space and keep those intruders at bay. Chapter 2. Setting Boundaries. Without guilt. Now that you've started recognizing the intruders in your life, the next step is learning how to set boundaries. Setting boundaries is essential for maintaining your peace of mind, but it's not always easy, especially when you're worried about how others might react. A lot of people feel guilty or selfish when they start to assert their boundaries, but it's important to understand that setting boundaries is not only healthy, but necessary for your well-being. Let's start with what boundaries are. At their core, boundaries are the limits you set for yourself in terms of what you're willing to accept from others. They define how much of your time, energy, and personal space you're willing to give. Boundaries are deeply personal, and they can vary from one person to another. What feels comfortable for you might not feel the same for someone else, and that's perfectly okay. One of the main reasons people struggle with setting boundaries is the fear of disappointing others or being seen as difficult. We've all been there, saying yes when we really want to say no, agreeing to something that we know will stretch us too thin, or allowing someone to push our limits because we don't want to cause tension. But here's the truth. Every time you ignore your own boundaries, you're essentially telling yourself that your needs don't matter as much as others. Over time, this can lead to feelings of resentment, burnout, and even a loss of self-respect. So how do you set boundaries without feeling guilty? It starts with a mindset shift. Understand that setting boundaries is not about being selfish. It's about self-care. You can't pour from an empty cup, and if you're constantly giving without taking care of your own needs, you'll eventually run out of energy. When you set boundaries, you're not only protecting yourself, but also making sure that you can show up fully for the people and activities that truly matter to you. The next step is getting comfortable with saying no. For many people, this is one of the hardest parts of setting boundaries. We're conditioned to be polite, agreeable, and accommodating. So saying no can feel like we're letting someone down or being rude. But saying no is a powerful tool for maintaining your boundaries, and it doesn't have to be confrontational. One way to practice saying no is to keep your responses simple and direct. You don't need to over-explain or justify your decision. For example, if someone asks you to take on extra work that you don't have time for, you can say something like, "I'm sorry, I'm already at full capacity and won't be able to take this on." If a friend invites you to an event that you're not interested in, you can simply say, "Thanks for the invite, but I won't be able to make it." The key is to be polite but firm. You're not asking for permission to set your boundaries. You're stating them. Another important aspect of setting boundaries is being consistent. Once you've communicated your boundaries, it's crucial to stick to them. People may test your boundaries, either intentionally or unintentionally, to see if you're serious about them. If you give in or make exceptions too often, you send the message that your boundaries are flexible and can be pushed. This can lead to frustration and confusion, both for you and for the people in your life. Consistency also helps build respect. When others see that you're serious about your boundaries, they're more likely to respect them. This doesn't mean that everyone will immediately accept your boundaries without question. Some people might react negatively, especially if they're used to having more access to your time and energy. But that's okay. It's not your job to make everyone happy. Your job is to protect your well-being and create a life that feels right for you. One of the most powerful things you can do when setting boundaries is to communicate them calmly and assertively. Assertiveness doesn't mean being aggressive or confrontational. It means being clear and confident in expressing your needs. When you communicate your boundaries assertively, you're letting others know that you value yourself and your time. You're also showing that you're willing to stand up for what's important to you, even if it means facing some pushback. It's also helpful to anticipate how others might react to your boundaries and prepare for those reactions. Some people might be surprised, others might be upset, and some might even try to guilt trip you into changing your mind. This is where it's important to stay grounded in your decision. Remember why you're setting these boundaries in the first place: to protect your peace, your time, and your energy. If someone reacts negatively, that's a reflection of their own expectations, not your responsibility to manage. Setting boundaries can also bring up feelings of guilt, especially if you're used to putting others' needs before your own. It's important to acknowledge these feelings, but not let them dictate your actions. Guilt is a natural emotion, but it doesn't always reflect reality. Just because you feel guilty doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. In fact, the more you practice setting boundaries, the more you'll start to see that guilt is often a sign that you're breaking old patterns and stepping into a healthier way of relating to others. Finally, remember that setting boundaries is a skill that takes time to develop. You might not get it perfectly right every time, and that's okay. The important thing is that you're making an effort to protect your well-being and create a life that feels balanced and fulfilling. With practice, setting boundaries will become more natural, and you'll start to notice a positive shift in your relationships and your overall sense of peace. In the next chapter, we'll dive deeper into how to handle situations where people push back against your boundaries and how to stay firm even when it's challenging. But for now, give yourself permission to start setting boundaries without guilt. You deserve to protect your time, energy, and peace of mind without feeling like you owe anyone an explanation. Chapter 3: Handling Pushback and Standing Firm. By now, you've started to recognize intruders in your life and have begun setting boundaries to protect your peace. But what happens when someone doesn't take your boundaries seriously? Unfortunately, it's common to face pushback when you start asserting yourself, especially from people who are used to having more access to your time, energy, or personal life. This chapter is all about handling that pushback and standing firm in your decisions, even when it's tough. First, it's important to understand why some people push back against boundaries. Often, it's because they've grown accustomed to a certain dynamic in your relationship, one where they've had more influence or control. When you start setting boundaries, it can feel like a shift in power, and that can be uncomfortable for them. They might not even realize they're doing it, but their reaction can range from mild surprise to outright resistance. Another reason for pushback is that some people genuinely don't understand boundaries. They might have grown up in environments where personal space wasn't respected, or they might have their own insecurities that make it hard for them to accept someone else's limits. This doesn't excuse their behavior, but it can help you approach the situation with empathy while still standing your ground. When you encounter pushback, the first thing to remember is that your boundaries are valid. Just because someone else doesn't like them doesn't mean you should change them. It can be tempting to give in or soften your stance to avoid conflict, but doing so undermines the very purpose of setting boundaries in the first place. Your boundaries are there to protect you, and you have every right to enforce them. One way to handle pushback is to remain calm and composed. When someone challenges your boundaries, they might be expecting you to react emotionally or to back down. By staying calm, you signal that you're serious about your boundaries and that you won't be easily swayed. You don't need to argue or defend your boundaries at length. A simple, firm statement is often enough. For example, if someone continues to pressure you after you've already said no, you can respond with, "I've already made my decision, and I'm not going to change it." It's also helpful to anticipate pushback in advance, especially from people who have a history of overstepping your boundaries. Think about how they might react and prepare a response that's calm and assertive. This way, you're not caught off guard if they challenge you. For example, if you know a certain friend always tries to guilt-trip you into doing things you're not comfortable with, you might plan to say something like, "I understand that you're disappointed, but this is what I need to do for myself right now." Sometimes people push back because they're genuinely confused or hurt by your boundaries. In these cases, it might be helpful to offer a brief explanation, but only if you're comfortable doing so. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your boundaries, but if you think it might help the other person understand, you can provide one. For example, you might say, "I'm setting this boundary because I need more time to focus on my personal projects." Or, I'm not comfortable discussing this topic, and I'd appreciate it if we could talk about something else. It's important to recognize that not everyone will accept your boundaries right away. Some people might need time to adjust, while others might never fully respect your limits. This can be difficult, especially if the person pushing back is someone you care about. In these situations, it's crucial to stay firm and not let their reactions dictate your decisions. You're not responsible for how others feel about your boundaries. You're only responsible for protecting your own well-being. If someone continues to disregard your boundaries despite your best efforts, you may need to reassess the relationship. This doesn't mean you have to cut them out of your life completely, but it might mean limiting your interactions or finding new ways to protect your space. For example, if a friend consistently ignores your boundaries, you might choose to spend less time with them or only interact in settings where you feel more in control. If a coworker doesn't respect your limits, you might need to involve a supervisor or HR to help enforce your boundaries. Another key aspect of standing firm in the face of pushback is knowing when to walk away from a situation. Sometimes, the best way to enforce your boundaries is to remove yourself from the conversation or interaction entirely. This might mean ending a phone call, leaving a gathering early, or even taking a break from a relationship that's causing you stress. Walking away can be empowering because it shows that you're in control of your time and energy, and you're not willing to compromise your boundaries for anyone. It's also important to have a support system in place. Surround yourself with people who respect your boundaries and who can offer encouragement when you're facing pushback. These could be friends, family members, or even a therapist or support group. Having someone to talk to who understands what you're going through can make it easier to stand firm in your decisions. They can remind you that you're doing the right thing and help you stay focused on your goals. As you continue to practice setting and maintaining boundaries, you'll likely find that the pushback becomes less intense over time. People will start to understand that you're serious about protecting your space, and they'll either adjust their behavior or drift away. Either way, you'll be left with relationships that are more balanced, respectful, and supportive. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to balance boundaries with empathy, ensuring that you can protect your space without losing compassion for others. But for now, focus on standing firm when faced with pushback. Remember, your boundaries are there to protect you, and you have every right to enforce them, no matter how others react. Chapter 4. Balancing Boundaries with Empathy. By now, you've learned how to recognize intruders, set boundaries, and handle pushback. But setting boundaries doesn't mean shutting people out or becoming unapproachable. It's entirely possible and important to balance your boundaries with empathy. In this chapter, we'll explore how to maintain your personal space while still being kind and understanding toward others. Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. It's what allows us to connect with people on a deeper level, offering support and compassion when they need it. But sometimes, empathy can make setting boundaries more challenging. You might worry that by setting a boundary, you're being unkind or that you're letting someone down when they're in need. This is where the balance comes in, finding a way to be compassionate without compromising your own well-being. The first step to balancing boundaries with empathy is understanding that they're not mutually exclusive. You can care about someone deeply and still set limits on how much of your time and energy you're willing to give. In fact, setting boundaries can actually enhance your relationships because it ensures that your interactions are healthy and sustainable. When you're not constantly overextending yourself, you can show up more fully and genuinely for the people you care about. One way to approach this balance is by practicing what's known as compassionate boundaries. Compassionate boundaries involve setting limits in a way that's kind and considerate, both to yourself and to others. This means being clear about your needs, while also acknowledging the other person's feelings. For example, if a friend is going through a tough time, and you're not able to offer as much support as they're asking for, you can say something like, "I care about you and I want to help, but I also need to take care of myself right now. Let's find a way for me to support you that works for both of us." Compassionate boundaries are about finding a middle ground where both parties feel respected and valued. It's okay to offer alternatives or compromises that allow you to maintain your boundaries while still being there for the other person. For instance, if someone asks you for a favor that you can't do, you might suggest another way you can help that fits within your limits. This shows that you're still willing to support them, but on terms that work for you as well. Another important aspect of balancing boundaries with empathy is learning to listen actively. Active listening means giving your full attention to the other person without immediately jumping in to offer solutions or advice. Sometimes people just need to feel heard and understood, and by listening actively, you can provide that support without overstepping your own boundaries. For example, if a friend is venting about a problem, you can listen and acknowledge their feelings without feeling obligated to fix the situation or offer more help than you're comfortable with. It's also important to be mindful of your own emotional limits. Empathy can be exhausting, especially if you're constantly putting others' needs before your own. This is why it's crucial to regularly check in with yourself and assess how you're feeling. Are you feeling overwhelmed or drained? Are you starting to resent the people you're trying to help? These are signs that your empathy might be taking a toll on your well-being, and it might be time to reinforce your boundaries. One way to protect your emotional energy is by setting boundaries around how much time you spend on certain interactions. For example, if you know that a particular conversation or situation is likely to be emotionally taxing, you can limit the amount of time you spend on it. This might mean setting a time limit for a phone call or politely excusing yourself from a conversation when you feel your energy waning. It's okay to take breaks or step away from situations that are draining, even if it's just for a short while. Another strategy for balancing boundaries with empathy is to practice self-compassion. Self-compassion means treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would offer to a friend. It's about recognizing that you're human and that it's okay to have limits. When you practice self-compassion, you're less likely to feel guilty about setting boundaries because you understand that taking care of yourself is just as important as taking care of others. It's also helpful to remind yourself that empathy doesn't mean taking on someone else's problems as your own. You can care deeply about someone without absorbing their stress or emotional burdens. This is where the concept of empathic detachment comes in. Empathic detachment means being able to understand and support someone's feelings without becoming emotionally entangled in their issues. It's about maintaining your own emotional boundaries while still being compassionate. For example, if a friend is going through a difficult time, you can offer a listening ear and words of comfort without taking on their anxiety or sadness as your own. Finally, it's important to communicate your boundaries with empathy. When setting a boundary, use language that's kind and respectful, but also clear and direct. You can acknowledge the other person's feelings while still being firm about your own needs. For example, you might say, "I understand that this is important to you and I want to support you, but I need to take care of myself right now. Let's find a solution that works for both of us." In the end, balancing boundaries with empathy is about finding a way to care for others without sacrificing your own well-being. It's about being kind to yourself and others, and recognizing that healthy relationships are built on mutual respect and understanding. When you can set boundaries with empathy, you create a space where both you and the people in your life can thrive. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to set boundaries in specific relationships, such as with family, friends, and co-workers. But for now, focus on finding that balance between empathy and boundaries. Remember, you can be both kind and firm, compassionate and strong. It's all about respecting yourself while still caring for others. Chapter 5. Setting Boundaries with Family. When it comes to setting boundaries, family can be one of the toughest areas to navigate. Family relationships are often deep, long-lasting, and full of emotion. These connections can make it hard to say no or to create space when you need it. But just because someone is family doesn't mean they have unlimited access to your time, energy, or personal life. In this chapter, we'll talk about how to set boundaries with family members in a way that's respectful, clear, and effective. First, let's talk about why it's so hard to set boundaries with family. For many people, there's an unspoken expectation that family comes first, no matter what. You might feel obligated to put your family's needs above your own, or you might worry about causing conflict or hurting someone's feelings. Family dynamics can also be complex, with old patterns of behavior that are hard to break. But here's the thing. You have the right to set boundaries, even with the people closest to you. In fact, setting boundaries with family is one of the most important steps you can take to protect your well-being. One of the first things to keep in mind is that setting boundaries with family doesn't mean you love them any less. It simply means that you're taking care of yourself so that you can be the best version of yourself for them. When you set boundaries, you're actually helping to create healthier relationships because you're being honest about what you need. Let's start with a common scenario. The family member who constantly asks for favors or demands your time. This could be a parent who expects you to drop everything whenever they need something, a sibling who always turns to you for help, or an extended family member who frequently asks for your time and energy. While it's natural to want to help, it's also important to recognize when these demands are becoming too much. When you need to set a boundary in this situation, it's important to be clear and direct. You can still be kind, but you need to make sure your message is understood. For example, if your parent is always asking you to run errands, you might say, "I love helping you, but I can't do this as often as I have been. I need some time for myself. Let's figure out a way that works for both of us." If a sibling is always relying on you for support, you can say, "I care about you and want to help, but I can't be available all the time. I need to take care of my own needs too." Another tricky situation is dealing with family members who don't respect your privacy. This could be a parent who's constantly asking about your personal life, a sibling who's always trying to get involved in your decisions, or a relative who's too interested in what's going on with you. In these cases, It's important to set boundaries around what you're willing to share and what you'd like to keep private. When setting privacy boundaries, it's helpful to be upfront and honest. You might say something like, "I appreciate that you care about me, but I'm not comfortable discussing this topic. I'd rather keep it private." If someone continues to push, you can gently but firmly repeat your boundary. "I've already said that I'd like to keep this private. I'd appreciate it if we could talk about something else." It's also important to remember that setting boundaries with family might not always be easy. Some family members might react negatively or try to make you feel guilty. They might say things like, "But we're family," or "You've changed." This is where it's important to stand firm. Remember that setting boundaries is about taking care of yourself, and that's not something you should feel guilty about. You can acknowledge their feelings while still holding your ground. For example, you might say, "I understand that this is difficult for you, but this is what I need to do for myself." Another key aspect of setting boundaries with family is knowing when to walk away from a conversation or situation that's becoming too heated. If a family member is not respecting your boundaries, it's okay to take a break. You might say, "I think we need to take a step back from this conversation. Let's talk about it later when we're both feeling calmer." Walking away doesn't mean you're giving up on the relationship. It just means you're giving yourself space to regroup and protect your peace. Sometimes setting boundaries with family might mean spending less time with certain family members, especially if they're consistently disrespecting your boundaries or causing you stress. This doesn't mean you're cutting them out of your life completely, but it does mean that you're prioritizing your own well-being. You might choose to limit your interactions or only see them in settings where you feel more comfortable. It's okay to protect your peace, even if it means creating a bit of distance. It's also important to have a support system outside of your family. Friends, partners, or even a therapist can provide valuable support when you're navigating difficult family dynamics. They can offer perspective, remind you that your boundaries are valid, and help you stay grounded when you're feeling pressured by family. Finally, remember that setting boundaries with family is an ongoing process. Family relationships are dynamic, and there might be times when you need to revisit or reinforce your boundaries. That's okay. The important thing is that you're staying true to yourself and protecting your well-being. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to set boundaries with friends, another area where things can get complicated. But for now, focus on setting and maintaining boundaries with your family. Remember, it's not about shutting people out. It's about creating healthy, respectful relationships where everyone's needs are acknowledged, including your own. Chapter 6. Setting Boundaries with Friends. Friendships are some of the most important relationships we have. They bring joy, support, and a sense of belonging. But just like with family, there are times when it's necessary to set boundaries with friends to keep those relationships healthy. This chapter is all about how to do that while maintaining the connection and trust that make friendships so special. First, let's talk about why setting boundaries with friends can be challenging. Unlike family, where relationships are often defined by roles and responsibilities, friendships are usually based on mutual affection and shared experiences. This can make it feel awkward or uncomfortable to set boundaries because you don't want to risk hurting the other person or damaging the friendship. But the truth is, setting boundaries is one of the best things you can do for a friendship. It helps prevent misunderstandings resentment, and burnout, all of which can strain even the strongest bonds. One common area where boundaries are needed in friendships is with time and availability. It's natural to want to spend time with your friends and be there for them, but it's also important to make sure you're not overcommitting yourself or neglecting your own needs. If you have a friend who constantly wants to hang out or always expects you to be available, it might be time to set some limits. When setting boundaries around time, it's important to be clear and honest about what you can realistically offer. You might say, "I love spending time with you, but I need to make sure I'm balancing my time between different things. I can't hang out as often as I used to, but let's plan something fun for next week." This way, you're acknowledging the value of the friendship while also setting a boundary that protects your time and energy. Another area where boundaries might be necessary is with emotional support. Friends often turn to each other for advice, comfort, and a listening ear, which is a big part of what makes friendships so valuable. But there are times when providing emotional support can become overwhelming, especially if one friend is relying too heavily on the other. If you find yourself feeling drained or overwhelmed by a friend's constant need for support, it's okay to set a boundary. You might say something like, "I care about you and want to help, but I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed right now. Can we talk about something lighter, or maybe find another way to support each other?" This kind of statement shows that you still care about the friendship, but it also protects your own emotional well-being. It's important to remember that you're not obligated to be your friend's therapist, and it's okay to take a step back when you need to. Boundaries are also important when it comes to differences in values or lifestyles. Sometimes friends might make choices or have opinions that don't align with your own. This can lead to tension or discomfort, especially if those differences start to impact the friendship. In these situations, it's important to set boundaries that allow you to maintain the friendship without compromising your own values. For example, if a friend is engaging in behavior that makes you uncomfortable, you might say, "I respect your choices, but I'm not comfortable with that. I'd prefer if we did something else together instead." This way, you're not judging or criticizing your friend, but you're still protecting your own comfort and values. It's also important to be open to the fact that your friend might set their own boundaries in response, and that's okay. Healthy friendships involve mutual respect for each other's limits. Sometimes, boundaries in friendships involve addressing conflicts directly. It's natural for disagreements or misunderstandings to arise in any relationship, but how you handle them can make a big difference in the health of the friendship. If a friend has crossed a boundary or hurt your feelings, it's important to communicate how you feel in a way that's honest but also kind. You might say something like, "I really value our friendship, so I want to be honest with you about something that's been bothering me." When you describe the action, "I felt," describe your feeling. "I'd appreciate it if we could find a way to avoid that in the future." This approach allows you to address the issue without attacking your friend, and it opens the door for a constructive conversation about how to move forward. It's also important to recognize when a friendship might be becoming unhealthy or toxic. If a friend consistently disrespects your boundaries, belittles your feelings, or makes you feel bad about yourself, it might be time to reevaluate the relationship. This doesn't mean you have to cut them out of your life completely, but it might mean creating more distance or limiting your interactions. Ending or distancing yourself from a friendship can be one of the hardest boundaries to set, but it's sometimes necessary for your own well-being. If you decide to take this step, Try to do it with compassion and honesty. You might say, "I've been feeling like we're not on the same page lately, and I think I need to take a step back from our friendship. I still care about you, but I need some space to focus on myself right now." It's okay to prioritize your own needs, even if it means letting go of a friendship that's no longer serving you. Lastly, remember that setting boundaries with friends is a sign of a healthy relationship. True friends will respect your boundaries and appreciate your honesty, even if it's difficult at first. And just as you set boundaries with others, be open to your friends setting boundaries with you. A strong friendship is built on mutual respect, understanding, and support, and boundaries are an essential part of that foundation. In the next chapter, we'll dive into setting boundaries at work, another area where things can get tricky. But for now, focus on your friendships and think about where you might need to set some boundaries to keep those relationships healthy and balanced. Remember, it's okay to say no or to ask for space, even with your closest friends. Boundaries aren't walls. They're tools that help you create stronger, more fulfilling connections. Chapter 7. Setting boundaries at work. Work is a huge part of our lives. It's where we spend a lot of our time, energy, and focus. Because of that, it's incredibly important to have healthy boundaries in the workplace. Without them, work can become overwhelming, stressful, and can even spill over into your personal life, leaving you feeling burned out and unhappy. In this chapter, we'll talk about how to set and maintain boundaries at work so you can stay productive and satisfied without sacrificing your well-being. The first thing to understand about work boundaries is that they're necessary for everyone, no matter what kind of job you have. Whether you're in an office, working remotely, or out in the field, boundaries help you manage your time, energy, and mental health. They ensure that you can do your job effectively while also maintaining a healthy balance between work and the rest of your life. One of the most important boundaries to set at work is around your time. This includes everything from your work hours to how much of your free time you're willing to dedicate to job-related tasks. It's easy to fall into the trap of working late, answering emails after hours, or taking on more projects than you can handle. But without clear boundaries, this can quickly lead to burnout. To set boundaries at work, start by clearly defining your work hours. If your job requires you to be available from 9 to 5, make sure you're sticking to those hours as much as possible. If you're working from home or have flexible hours, it's even more important to set a clear start and end time to your workday. Let your colleagues and supervisors know your availability and try to resist the urge to answer work-related messages outside of those hours. If you're asked to take on additional tasks or stay late, it's okay to say no if it's going to interfere with your personal time, or if you're already feeling overwhelmed. You might say something like, "I'm happy to help with this, but I need to make sure it doesn't conflict with my other responsibilities. Can we discuss a timeline that works for both of us?" This way, you're showing that you're willing to contribute, but not at the expense of your own well-being. Another key area where boundaries are crucial is in managing your workload. It's natural to want to do your best at work, but it's important to recognize when you're taking on too much. If you're constantly saying yes to every task, project, or request that comes your way, you're likely to end up feeling overwhelmed and stressed out. This is why it's important to set boundaries around what you can realistically handle. When someone asks you to take on more work, it's okay to evaluate whether you have the capacity to do it. If you don't, be honest and upfront. You might say, I'm currently at capacity with my workload, and I want to make sure I can give my best to the tasks I already have. Can we prioritize this for later, or is there someone else who might be able to help? By setting this boundary, you're protecting your ability to do your job well without stretching yourself too thin. Setting boundaries at work also involves managing relationships with colleagues and supervisors. It's important to maintain professional and respectful interactions, but it's equally important to protect your personal space and energy. For example, if a colleague frequently interrupts your work with non-essential conversations, it's okay to set a boundary around your focus time. You might say, I really value our conversations, but I need to focus on this project right now. Can we catch up during lunch or after work? This lets your colleague know that you're not shutting them out, but you do need to prioritize your work during certain hours. Similarly, if a supervisor is micromanaging or overstepping, it's important to have a respectful conversation about your need for autonomy. If you're dealing with a micromanaging boss, you might say, I appreciate your guidance, but I feel that I work best when I have more independence. I'd like to check in with you regularly to keep you updated, but I think I can handle this task on my own. This helps establish your boundary while also showing that you're committed to doing your job well. Another aspect of workplace boundaries is managing your emotional energy. Work can be stressful, and it's important to recognize when you're feeling drained or overwhelmed. This might involve setting boundaries around how much emotional labor you're willing to take on, such as being the go-to person for solving conflicts or providing support to colleagues. While it's great to be a supportive co-worker, it's also important to protect your own mental health. If you find yourself in a situation where you're being relied on too heavily for emotional support, it's okay to set a boundary. You might say, I'm happy to listen and offer support, but I'm also feeling a bit overwhelmed. Can we talk about finding additional resources or support for you? This shows that you care, but also that you recognize your own limits. Finally, it's important to remember that setting boundaries at work isn't just about protecting yourself. It's also about setting a positive example for others. When you set and maintain healthy boundaries, you show your colleagues that it's okay to prioritize their own well-being. This can create a more balanced and respectful work environment for everyone. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to set boundaries in romantic relationships, which can be particularly complex. But for now, focus on your workplace and think about where you might need to set some boundaries. Remember, it's okay to say no, to protect your time and energy, and to advocate for what you need to do your job well. Boundaries at work aren't just about saying no, they're about creating a sustainable work life that allows you to thrive. Chapter 8. Setting Boundaries in Romantic Relationships. Romantic relationships are deeply personal and can bring a lot of joy and fulfillment. However, they can also come with their own set of challenges, especially when it comes to setting and maintaining boundaries. In a romantic relationship, boundaries are essential for ensuring that both partners feel respected, understood, and balanced. In this chapter, we'll explore how to set boundaries in romantic relationships in a way that strengthens your connection and promotes mutual respect. The first thing to understand is that boundaries in romantic relationships are about maintaining your own identity and needs while also nurturing the relationship. It's easy to lose yourself in a relationship, especially if you're deeply in love or committed. However, it's important to remember that a healthy relationship involves both partners having their own space and respecting each other's individual needs. One common area where boundaries are needed in romantic relationships is around personal space and time. It's natural to want to spend a lot of time with your partner, but it's also important to maintain your own interests, friendships, and activities. Setting boundaries around personal time helps ensure that both partners have the space they need to grow and pursue their own passions. You might say to your partner, "I love spending time with you, but I also need some time for myself to focus on my hobbies and friends." Can we find a balance that works for both of us? This way, you're expressing your need for personal time while also showing that you value the time you spend together. Another important boundary in romantic relationships is around communication. Healthy communication involves being open and honest with each other, but it also means respecting each other's need for privacy and space. For example, if you need some time to process your thoughts or feelings before discussing a sensitive topic, it's okay to set that boundary. You might say, "I need some time to think about this before we talk. Let's discuss it tomorrow when I've had a chance to reflect." This allows you to address important issues without feeling pressured to respond immediately. It's also important to be a good listener and to respect your partner's need for time and space when they need it. Boundaries also come into play when dealing with conflicts and disagreements. It's natural for couples to have disagreements, but it's important to approach these situations with respect and understanding. Setting boundaries around how you handle conflicts can help prevent arguments from escalating and ensure that both partners feel heard and valued. You might set a boundary like, "I think it's important for us to take a break if we're getting too heated. Let's step away and come back to this conversation when we're both feeling calmer." This helps ensure that conflicts are addressed in a constructive way and that both partners have the opportunity to express their feelings without getting overwhelmed. Trust and respect are also crucial in romantic relationships, and boundaries play a big role in maintaining them. It's important to set boundaries around what you're comfortable with in terms of privacy, personal space, and interactions with others. For example, if you're uncomfortable with your partner sharing personal details about your relationship with others, it's okay to set that boundary. You might say, "I'd prefer that we keep certain aspects of our relationship private. Can we agree to keep those things between us?" This helps protect your privacy and ensures that both partners feel respected and secure in the relationship. Another aspect of boundaries in romantic relationships is handling each other's past experiences and relationships. It's important to acknowledge and respect each other's pasts while focusing on the present and future together. Setting boundaries around how you discuss or engage with past relationships can help prevent unnecessary conflicts and insecurities. You might say, "I understand that we both have past experiences, but I'd like to focus on building our future together. Can we avoid discussing our exes and concentrate on our relationship?" This allows you to address any lingering insecurities and build a positive, forward-looking relationship. It's also important to remember that setting boundaries is not about creating distance or pushing your partner away. Instead, it's about creating a healthy, balanced relationship where both partners feel valued and respected. Boundaries help you maintain your own well-being while also fostering a strong and loving connection with your partner. In the next chapter, we'll talk about setting boundaries with yourself, which is an essential part of maintaining a balanced and healthy life. But for now, focus on your romantic relationship and think about where you might need to set some boundaries. Remember, healthy boundaries are about mutual respect, understanding, and ensuring that both partners feel happy and fulfilled in the relationship. Chapter 9. Setting boundaries with yourself. Setting boundaries isn't just about dealing with other people. It's also about how you manage your own behaviors, habits, and expectations. Boundaries with yourself are crucial for maintaining balance, productivity, and mental well-being. In this chapter, we'll explore how to set and maintain boundaries with yourself to create a healthier and more fulfilling life. 1. Identifying your limits. The first step in setting boundaries with yourself is recognizing your limits. This means understanding how much you can realistically handle in terms of work, responsibilities, and personal commitments. Many people struggle with overcommitting themselves, taking on too many tasks, or pushing themselves beyond their limits. This often leads to stress, burnout, and a lack of fulfillment. To identify your limits, start by paying attention to how you feel when you're overwhelmed. Do you notice signs of stress or exhaustion? Are there certain tasks or commitments that consistently leave you feeling drained? Reflecting on these feelings can help you determine where your boundaries need to be set. For example, if you find yourself constantly stressed by your workload, it might be time to set limits on the number of projects you take on. 2. Setting realistic goals. Once you've identified your limits, it's important to set realistic goals for yourself. Setting goals that are achievable and aligned with your capabilities helps prevent frustration and burnout. Break your larger goals into smaller, manageable steps and focus on making steady progress rather than trying to achieve everything at once. For instance, if you're working on a major project, set specific milestones and deadlines for each phase. This way, you can track your progress and adjust your plan as needed, without feeling overwhelmed. Setting realistic goals also means acknowledging that it's okay to ask for help or adjust your expectations if needed. 3. Managing your time. Time management is a key aspect of setting boundaries with yourself. It's important to allocate your time effectively to ensure that you're balancing work, personal life, and self-care. Create a schedule that includes dedicated time for work, relaxation, hobbies, and social activities. Stick to this schedule as much as possible to maintain a balanced and fulfilling life. If you find that you're frequently running out of time or feeling rushed, reassess your schedule and priorities. Make sure you're not overloading yourself with tasks or neglecting important aspects of your life. Time management also involves setting aside time for rest and relaxation, which is crucial for maintaining your overall well-being. 4. Prioritizing self-care. Setting boundaries with yourself also means prioritizing self-care. Taking care of your physical, emotional, and mental health is essential for maintaining balance and avoiding burnout. This includes getting enough sleep, eating well, exercising regularly, and making time for activities that bring you joy and relaxation. Make self-care a non-negotiable part of your routine. Schedule regular breaks. Practice mindfulness and engage in activities that recharge your energy. Remember that self-care is not a luxury. It's a necessity for maintaining your health and well-being. 5. Managing your expectations. Another important aspect of setting boundaries with yourself is managing your expectations. It's easy to fall into the trap of perfectionism or setting unrealistic standards for yourself. This can lead to unnecessary stress and feelings of inadequacy. Instead, focus on setting achievable and realistic expectations. Acknowledge that it's okay to make mistakes and that you don't have to be perfect. Embrace a growth mindset where you view challenges and setbacks as opportunities for learning and growth rather than as failures. 6. Creating healthy habits. Developing healthy habits is a key part of setting boundaries with yourself. This includes creating routines and practices that support your well-being and help you maintain balance. Healthy habits might include regular exercise, mindful eating, setting aside time for hobbies, or practicing gratitude. Start by incorporating small, positive changes into your daily routine. Gradually build on these habits to create a sustainable lifestyle that supports your goals and well-being. Consistency is key, so focus on making gradual improvements rather than trying to overhaul your entire life at once. 7. Reflecting and adjusting. Setting boundaries with yourself is an ongoing process. It's important to regularly reflect on how well your boundaries are working and make adjustments as needed. Take time to evaluate your goals, time management, self-care practices, and overall well-being. If you find that certain boundaries are not serving you as well as you'd hoped, make adjustments to better align with your needs and priorities. Be flexible and open to change. And remember that it's okay to reassess and refine your boundaries as you grow and evolve. In the next chapter, we'll discuss how to set boundaries in social settings and public spaces where the dynamics can be different from personal relationships. But for now, focus on setting and maintaining boundaries with yourself. Remember, self-boundaries are about creating a balanced and fulfilling life where you can thrive both personally and professionally. Chapter 10. Setting boundaries in social settings. Social settings can be both energizing and overwhelming. Whether it's a large event, a casual gathering, or just navigating public spaces, setting boundaries in these situations is key to maintaining your well-being and comfort. In this chapter, we'll explore how to establish and maintain boundaries in social settings so you can enjoy your time without feeling drained or stressed. 1. Understanding your social needs. The first step in setting boundaries in social settings is understanding your own needs and preferences. Everyone has different levels of comfort and energy when it comes to socializing. Some people thrive in large groups and social events, while others prefer smaller gatherings or quiet time alone. Knowing what works best for you helps you set appropriate boundaries that align with your comfort levels. Take some time to reflect on your social experiences. Do you feel energized or drained after social interactions? Are there certain types of social settings that you find particularly challenging? Understanding these aspects of your social needs will help you make informed decisions about how to set and maintain boundaries. 2. Communicating your boundaries. Once you've identified your social needs, it's important to communicate your boundaries clearly and respectfully. This might involve letting friends or family know if you need to leave a party early, or if you prefer not to attend certain types of events. Being honest about your needs helps set clear expectations and prevents misunderstandings. For example, you might say, "I'd love to come to your party, but I need to leave by 9 p.m. because I have an early morning the next day." This way, you're expressing your needs while still showing that you value the invitation and the event. 3. Managing your time at social events. When attending social events, Managing your time effectively is crucial for maintaining your boundaries. If you find that socializing for extended periods is overwhelming, plan to attend the event for a specific amount of time and stick to that plan. You can also schedule breaks or quiet moments to recharge if you need them. If you're at a party or gathering and feel that you're reaching your limit, it's okay to excuse yourself for a break or to leave the event early. You might say, "I'm having a great time, but I need to take a short break to recharge. I'll be back in a bit." This allows you to take care of yourself while still participating in the event. 4. Navigating social pressure. Social pressure can be challenging to handle, especially when it comes to making decisions about attending events or participating in activities. It's important to recognize when you're feeling pressured and to set boundaries that protect your well-being. If you're feeling pressured to attend an event or participate in an activity that you're not comfortable with, it's okay to say no. You might say, "I appreciate the invitation, but I'm going to have to pass this time. I hope you have a great time." Setting boundaries in this way helps you maintain your own comfort while also respecting the intentions of others. 5. Dealing with unsolicited advice or opinions. In social settings, you may encounter unsolicited advice or opinions from others. While some advice can be helpful, it's important to set boundaries around how much you're willing to take in or engage with. It's okay to politely decline advice or steer the conversation in a different direction if it's not something you're comfortable discussing. You might say, "I appreciate your input, but I'd prefer to handle this on my own." This sets a clear boundary while also showing that you value the person's perspective, but are not open to further discussion on the topic. 6. Handling conflict in social settings. Conflicts can arise in social settings, whether it's a disagreement with someone at a party or a misunderstanding with a friend. It's important to handle conflicts calmly and respectfully while also setting boundaries around how you want to engage in resolving the issue. If you find yourself in a conflict, it's helpful to address the issue directly but calmly. You might say, "I feel like we're not on the same page right now. Can we talk about this later when we're both feeling more relaxed?" This allows you to address the issue without escalating the situation and gives both parties time to cool down and reflect. 7. Respecting others' boundaries. Just as you set boundaries for yourself, it's important to respect the boundaries of others in social settings. This includes being mindful of personal space, listening to others' preferences, and honoring their need for privacy or time alone. Respecting others' boundaries fosters a positive and respectful social environment. For example, if someone indicates that they need some space or prefer not to engage in certain topics, honor their request without pressuring them. This creates a more comfortable and respectful interaction for everyone involved. 8. Reflecting on social interactions. After social events, take some time to reflect on how the experience went. Did you feel comfortable and respected? Were there any boundaries that you struggled to maintain, or areas where you could improve? Reflecting on these aspects helps you learn and adjust your approach to future social interactions. Consider keeping a journal or notes about your social experiences and how they align with your boundaries. This can help you track patterns and make adjustments to better manage your social well-being. In the next chapter, we'll wrap up with my message for you, summarizing the key points and offering final reflections on the journey of setting boundaries. But for now, focus on applying these strategies in your social settings. Remember, setting boundaries is about creating a balanced and fulfilling life where you can enjoy social interactions while staying true to yourself. My final message for you. As we come to the end of our time together, I want to share some final thoughts with you. Setting boundaries is something we've talked about a lot in this book, and I hope you found these ideas helpful. Remember, setting boundaries is really about taking care of yourself. It's about creating space where you can be yourself, where you feel respected and valued. It can be tough to start setting boundaries, especially if you're used to always putting others first or if you worry about what people will think. But boundaries aren't about pushing people away or being unkind. They're about making sure that you're not overwhelmed and that you have room to breathe and be happy. Think of boundaries as a way to protect your own well-being. They help you say yes to the things that truly matter and no to things that drain you. They let you focus on what's important to you, whether it's your personal time, your work, or your relationships. When you set boundaries, you're not being selfish. You're being smart and strong. You're showing that you respect yourself and your needs. As you go forward, be patient with yourself. Setting boundaries is a process, and it takes practice. It's okay to make mistakes and to adjust as you learn what works best for you. Celebrate your progress, no matter how small it seems. Each step you take towards setting and maintaining boundaries is a step toward a more balanced and fulfilling life. Remember, you deserve to live a life where you feel good about yourself and your choices. Setting boundaries helps you create that life. It's about finding that balance where you can be happy, productive, and true to yourself. So keep going. Keep setting those boundaries and keep making space for the things that bring you joy and peace. Thank you for being on all this time. I hope you carry these lessons with you and use them to build a life that you love. You have the power to create the life you want. Embrace it with confidence and care. Yours, Tomium.